to the Final Yard here on the 5 Reasons YouTube channel. I'm Ethan Skolnick. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick at 5 Reasons Sports. We got Eric Wadicki right above me. We got Lewis Sung. We got Michael Quirk. We may be joined by others. They just showed the graphic on the screen for CBS. The Miami Dolphins are now officially in the hunt, which is where it feels like they've been for the past 25 years. They are no longer in the playoffs. They lose to the New England Patriots 23-21. I will say that I called 23-20 on the pregame show, so the result was not altogether surprising. I guess the way that they got there was not ideal. First, Teddy Bridgewater, who was up and down, as I think was to be anticipated, ends up injuring his hand, goes out of the game. Skylar Thompson comes in, really struggles until late. By then, it was too late. Of course, Jason Sanders, because he always has to, missed a kick. That ends up being the difference at the end of the game. Again, butterfly effect. You don't know how things are going to play out. But here's my thing on it, guys, and we're just going to let people comment and come in today and vent. Miami Dolphins now lost 5 consecutive games. They need to win, but now they need help next week. They need the Patriots to lose up in Buffalo in addition to their own win against the Jets. They did not have their core guys at the 4 key positions today: quarterback, edge rusher, left tackle, and also, what am I missing there?
The cornerback, Xavier Howard.
Yeah, Xavier Howard. They didn't have any of that. But my thing today is this, okay? Nobody made a play. Like, we can point to the one interception, the Teddy Bridgewater pick that goes back the other direction, where it looked like none of the Dolphins' offensive players wanted to tackle. But nobody was above and beyond today. Like, when you need guys to step up to win a game on the road in that kind of environment against a team that's not very good, you need somebody to come through. Nobody did. I mean, the entire game, Teddy did not prove this year to be worth the money for a backup quarterback. Skylar Thompson, who we hyped up the entire preseason, is not ready to be an NFL player at this stage. And Josh Boyer's stuff didn't work. Why the hell is Duke Riley on the top receiver on the Patriots by the goal line? So much wrong here. Lewis, I know you need to calm down a little bit, but I'm not going to allow you to. What jumps out to you? Is it the macro, the fact that they've dropped 5 straight to put themselves in this position, or is it specifically today?
Well, first and foremost, I'm going to mention Prize Picks because that was the one bright spot of my day.
Lewis, Jason Sanders screwed up my 4-for-4 prop today again. Okay, so no, don't mention Prize Picks. Use the code 5 FIVE. Anyway, go ahead.
Okay, all right. This is what I'm going to say about everything that happened today. And believe it or not, I'm actually not as I'm disappointed. I'll say that. I'm not upset. I'm disappointed. And here's the situation. I feel like at some point we have to look at everything and say, how much is too much to overcome, guys? Because we have now had how many games where we've had our backup quarterback have to start a game. We had the first one, Teddy Bridgewater gets knocked out of the first play, and then Skylar Thompson has to come in throwing play cards out of his wristband because he doesn't know what he's doing, and that game goes obviously sour. Then Skylar Thompson gets a chance to play the whole week as the starter against the Vikings, and then he gets knocked out halfway in, and so now Teddy has to come in cold. Tua comes back, winning streak starts, and now here we go again. Now Tua's injured. He doesn't look good. Here comes Teddy again, and once again, Teddy gets knocked out halfway through the game. Skylar has to come in cold, and obviously it looks terrible. So I just feel like at this point, I don't know what to point at. I don't know what to blame. I don't know, like, we're talking about Mike McDaniel is not a good head coach. We're talking about Josh Boyer is not a good defensive coordinator. I agree. But at this point, it's like, how many people can you lose before it's important? Regardless of whatever reimagining they're trying to do with the pass rush, trying to bring in Bradley Chubb, trying to increase the pass rush so you don't have to have so much emphasis on your secondary. This team was designed and built around the secondary. And I'm going to go also and mention this as well. We're talking about firing Chris Greer because the depth at corner is awful. The depth at corner was one of our strongest aspects in training camp. We were feeling we were 10 players deep before the season started. And now we're talking about the depth at corner is awful. Why? You're muted, Ethan, if you're trying to counter me.
I mean, and now Keon Crossing is tackling guys when you
right, and Keon Crossing is tackling. But again, Keon Crossing was not brought in here to be a cornerback. He was brought in here to be a special teams ace, a la Walt Aikens. So
I get it, Lewis, but here's my thing about it. I understand it, and they're shorthanded. There's no question. I don't know how many of those guys could have pushed through and played. My belief is Terran Armstead would have done anything to play. I think we've seen that. I don't know. I really don't. Tua was kept out essentially because of the circumstances of his situation. And Bradley Chubb, again, I don't know what that situation is, but I believe Armstead.
He literally had a club on his hand, so he obviously was not
was not right. Okay, so I'm not going to blame those guys for not playing. But Michael, as we pivot here a little bit, here's my thing about it. Okay, this is the weakest Patriots team that we've seen they're not that good. They're just not. Like, the quarterback is not that good. They have no playmakers on the outside. Their running back is okay. They have some defensive players. There's no question about that. And Belichick's done a good job with the defense as that season's gone on. But that is not a formidable team. This was not a formidable environment today. I'm up here. Okay. It's 57 degrees. Okay. There's not all the rain came last night. Trust me, I was out for New Year's Eve. It's fine here. Okay. You have to find a way to get this thing done. I'm sorry. And I maybe the thing with Teddy that gets to me and why I don't think there's any chance he should be back next year. He's so nonchalant. Like, it's I don't know. Like, did he not want this circumstance? It just didn't seem to me at any time this year like he was really into this. And even today, like, the entire team, like, to me, what was encapsulated was the interception for the touchdown. Like, none of the Dolphins players were actually trying to keep him out of the end zone. It was just like, oh, just let it go. Just let it go. And I don't understand that, because this team was playing for McDaniel so many weeks ago. And I don't know if the national media crush about Tua, that they're just exhausted at this point. But it looks to me like, to a certain degree, I don't want to say they've quit, but they're not into it like they were into it a few weeks ago. They don't believe like they believed a few weeks ago. And it feels to me like the season's over, honestly.
Yeah, there definitely seemed to be a lack of urgency. Even being in the lead for a lot of the game, there seemed to be it almost felt like the team had already lost before they stepped on, with knowing the uphill that they had. No Chubb, no Armstead, no X, no Tua, on and on. Like you said, this is not a Patriots team that you really need to be afraid of. They have some playmakers on the back end of that defense, and then they have Judon, but the offense is just horrible. They were all out of sorts in the first half, and the Dolphins just could not capitalize. Really, I said in the pregame that winning the turnover battle would be critical. That true, but for the Patriots on that end, it just really seemed like a rudderless team out there today that didn't have much identity. You see Tua not playing out there, the leader of the team, and it was just brutal to see. It was just very, very brutal. You need Tua out there next week. Of course, he needs to be healthy. Hope he's healthy. That's first and foremost. But Teddy's just not that guy. Ethan, you talked about in the pregame how he just hasn't shown to be the guy he even was last year. And then Skylar Thompson, you can't have huge hopes for a guy, a 25-year-old rookie who wasn't exactly heralded coming out of Kansas State. And he looked absolutely lost. You saw he just kept settling underneath. If you have Raheem Mostert or Jeff Wilson in prize picks for receptions, congratulations, because those are the only two guys he was throwing to, aside from Gesicki. But yeah, if there's no Tua next week, the season is over. I have no hope for that.
Yeah. And Eric, I want to get to some of these comments, but I mean, I think that's the problem here, is that there's going to be this incredible scrutiny now on the Tua decision, and they're kind of boxed into corners because of Ernesto. Throw that one back up. This one, Ross is screwing around, cost us that draft pick. Ernesto, sorry, we need to get rid of McDaniel. Ends the game with a 6-game losing streak, has no emotions. I'm not going to get into the body language emotions thing. I don't know that matters. It matters more for a quarterback to me than it does for a coach. I don't know. I don't understand that. I feel like Mike had emotions. I feel we can question other things about Mike. I think we can question, Eric, why there wasn't more of a plan to try to get the ball to Waddle and Hill in other ways today, like run a wide receiver flat, right? Maybe run a reverse with Tyreek to just they just needed to get the ball in their playmakers' hands. They don't have that many of them. None of that happened today.
No, and honestly, it almost. I don't know if that's necessarily something. I have to see what the film looks like, but I don't know if that's something that they just schematically didn't account for, or if that was Teddy being really, really conservative today. Because for the most part, Teddy did what Teddy does in the first half. He was a steady hand. He was good, not great. He was solid, not going to make the explosive plays, but not going to, turn the ball over. He ultimately did in the second half. But I think we saw what Teddy Bridgewater is, and he's not it. The bottom line was this kind of felt like one of those antiseptic, soulless Joe Philbin teams out of the Miami Dolphins. And I'm not going to sit there and say that Mike McDaniel has no emotions. I'm sure that he does, but my question is at halftime, it's 7-7, but I was talking to people and I was telling them it feels like they should be up because they outperformed New England in the first half by a pretty good margin, and they just couldn't capitalize. And I just wonder if Mike McDaniel has it in him. And I know that he can't be anything that he's not, but I don't think he has it in him to be anything other than, hey, listen, I'm gonna be Mr. Best Friend with the guys. And at some point, I do want a head coach that's going to go into the locker room, and maybe not all the time because those rah guys tend to flame out pretty quickly. But I want a guy that's going to have a little bit of passion in the locker room and get on some guys when the effort's not there.
Well, I think that's fair. I mean, let's get to some of the other kind of game planning stuff here and pivot back to Lewis on this. Even Tyreek was flat and gave up that one INT. I don't know that to me, the INT was more on Skyler ball placement there, but yeah, Tyreek's one of the guys I'm talking about. Like, if you're an MVP candidate, like, you have to make big plays today. Gesicki had a couple of plays that were, to me, not great on his part. Okay, I know he made a couple, but not others. And again, Waddle, it's like when Tua's not there, he just disappears. I mean, this has been a consistent pattern here this season, and they're stuck in this really bad place because it is clear now they need Tua, right? Like, we have established they need Tua. But Tua's entire future is a doubt now.
Okay.
Which means any progress that you made, Lewis, this whole season is up in flames. If this is not a guy that you can count on to play consistently, it means you need to invest all of your money basically in a backup quarterback, which they kind of just did. And the guy hasn't come through for them any of the times that he was commissioned to play this year.
All right, but here's the thing, though, and this is where I start to get frustrated with a lot of people who are saying that X, Y, and Z is the problem. I don't like. Number one, the thing with injuries is that unfortunately they happen. It seems to be happening a lot more to Miami than to anybody else, besides maybe Tennessee. But I digress. With Tua, it's obvious what he's good at, right? He likes to attack the middle of the field. The one thing I made the tweet, and I showed you guys everything because my mentions blew up after that because they seemed to make the suggestion that I was saying that Teddy was better than Tua. That's not what I said. I said that what Tua needs to do to really take his game to the next level is start taking some of those little dump offs, those little check downs here and there, because for a while there, the Patriots didn't know what to do with it. They were like, hey, wait a second. Why are they not throwing it into the middle of the field like we were all expecting? Because that's Teddy's game. Teddy does the checkdowns. Now, if Tua were to do stuff like that, then suddenly there doesn't seem to be a way to stop this offense. Somebody had brought it up that's what they did against the Detroit Lions, and that was arguably Tua's best game of the entire season. Tua was throwing in the middle of the field. Tua was throwing it deep. Tua was throwing it underneath. Tua was throwing it everywhere, and the Lions had zero answer for it. Once Tua became sniper happy in the middle of the field, that's when things started to fall apart. Now, here's the other thing that I want to talk about, because if we're talking about firing Mike McDaniel, well, you're going to have to give me a better reason other than that he doesn't scream and holler. You're going to have to give me a better reason than he just doesn't have the emotions. There were a lot of times where we saw Brian Flores, right? Brian Flores, his predecessor, who everybody apparently suddenly loves and thinks he was the best coach ever, Mike McDaniel's terrible. Suddenly, there were a lot of times where Brian Flores would just kind of stand stoically on the sideline. He's not saying anything. He's not doing anything. And then he would come and scream and holler at the guys on the sidelines because he was like, we've seen McDaniel get angry. We've seen him get upset. So what exactly are you wanting him to do? Are you wanting him to rip into his players and say, you guys suck and I'm ashamed and disappointed in you? Like, what purpose does that serve? Seriously.
I don't think it serves any purpose, Lewis. I don't
Right.
think that's the issue. I think if you're going to criticize McDaniel, you criticize him for leaning on the wrong things at times this year. Okay, now I did think today he stayed with a run today, but you have one job in my view, as an offensive genius going into that place. Make sure that your only remaining playmakers. We talked about it before the game. Again, they didn't have their top corner. They didn't have their top pass rusher. The guy who's supposed to be their top. By the way, Jalen Phillips was invisible today. Okay, so for people who are talking about how Bradley Chubb hasn't done anything, what Bradley Chubb has done is made life easier for Jalen Phillips, and that was not available to them today. So that has essentially eliminated their pass rush. Okay, and they didn't have their left tackle, and they didn't have their quarterback. Who did they have? They had the top pass catching duo in Dolphins history. You have to find a way to get those guys the ball consistently early in the game, no matter who the quarterback is. Find a way to do it. Pitch play, wide receiver flat, reverse, anything. Get them involved and put the Patriots on their heels. They didn't do that, okay? And Tyreek then, we can argue about the Skyler interception, whose fault that was. It was not a well-thrown ball. But Waddle was not a factor. Hill was not enough of a factor. That's their offense. I mean, Mostert's good. Wilson had some moments today that were okay. They didn't run the ball particularly effectively, but they did stick with it. They had to get the ball to playmakers. And that, to me, if you're going to criticize McDaniel, it's for that, okay? It's not the other stuff. The other thing you may want to criticize McDaniel for, and I know there's some variation in our network about this because the 3 yards guys are more behind him than we are, it's for keeping Josh Boyer this year. Because that clearly has not worked out very well. Okay, and I understand what you're saying, Lewis. He hasn't had the type of players that we thought he was going to have is built around the corners.
Well, okay. So can I interject?
They get no turnovers, Lewis. Like they don't turn it. Patriots had touchdowns 4 straight weeks from their defense. The Dolphins never do that.
Can I interject?
Yes, go ahead.
The first choice, if I'm not mistaken, for McDaniel was to go get Vic Fangio. That didn't work out because Fangio was not in the mood at the time. And now he's like an assistant, something kind of like an on and off coach for, I think it's for the Eagles right now that he's doing stuff for. He's just kind of hanging, chilling, just being like, oh yeah, I'm kind of around, but not really. So that's number one. So at the time when the decision was made, keeping Boyer seemed like the best choice because who are you going to go out there and get? Did we have other options? Did we have the way that the logic was sound? It's like, oh, we'll just take the guy who was the defensive coordinator while Flores was here, and he can just basically run the same scheme that was working before. And again, this is where I say at some point you have to look at it and say, we're just too banged up to go anymore. Because look, again, this defense is designed around the secondary. We assumed, and everybody in that building assumed, that Byron Jones would be available. That did not happen. We assumed that Xavier Howard would continue to play at an all-pro level. That did not happen. We assumed that we would have the likes of Nick Needham. He's down. Trill Williams, he's down. Cater Cole, who has to step in. He's a rookie. He's still learning. And so now we don't even have that much. We signed Mackenzie Alexander. He never even gets to play because he goes down. And so, again, we're talking about all this supposed depth that we're missing. We had depth. They all got hurt, every single one of them. And New England, yes, they had the same issues, and we should have attacked them. I agree with that. But we're blaming Chris Grier and Mike McDaniel for things that are really out of their control. Like the only thing that I can say they can control, and I'll agree with you on this, Ethan, is that Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle should have gotten the ball more, reverses, stuff like that. I would have been awesome with that. I would have loved that. So, but if we're going to talk about firing Chris Grier because he didn't get enough depth for the Dolphins, I mean, we had the depth projected. We were looking at a roster that we had never seen before for this Dolphin, and the circumstances just didn't turn out the way we had hoped. We thought Byron Jones was going to be ready for week 1. No, his Achilles or whatever is not healing the way we wanted to. Okay, he's gone. So, we'll go to Nick Needham. Nope, can't have Nick Needham. Trill Williams? Nope, can't have Trill Williams. Mackenzie Alexander off the street? Nope, can't have Mackenzie Alexander. How many players can you lose at there? Like, name me one team who is so deep in the secondary that they have like 10 different players that can step in here and be the starter.
I get that, but I understand that, and I'm not saying that Greer should be fired. I don't, Michael, you're not going there, are you? I don't think Greer should be fired, right?
Eric looked like he wanted to interject.
I mean, either of you guys, Michael, you go first. I mean, how should we feel about Chris Greer? Because Chris Greer went all in, right? Chris Greer just traded draft picks for Bradley Chubb. Chris Greer, I mean, it's not his fault that Ross is, the tampering situation, but like they gutted the future to a large degree to win this year. And when you're 8-3, you feel like you should do that, right? Like, so I don't have an issue with that.
I find that the calling for Chris Greer firing asinine. The most important thing for a GM is to go and find a good young quarterback. And he did that. He has a good young quarterback. And when you have a quarterback on a cheap contract under control, you go and build around him and try to win now. He did that with the Tyreek Hill trade, which you look what he gave up for that. I'd do that 10 out of 10 times. And then he saw, okay, needs a pass rusher. Go out and get the best pass rusher that's available on the market. And Bradley Chubb was hearing, hey, got to fix the offensive line. Goes and gets what many ranks as the best free agent available in this last offseason, brings Terran Armstead down to Miami. You look at some of the fines that he's had in Javon Holland second round and Brandon Jones third round and on, that it's just insane. What Lewis is saying is no one can withstand this just onslaught of injuries. You look at what the secondary was. I tweeted this during the game that coming into the year is supposed to be X, Byron Jones, Brandon Jones, Javon Holland, and Nick Needham. 4 of those guys were out today. And Javon Holland, injures his hand, is out briefly. I think just took a couple plays off. But that's just so brutal. You lose Emmanuel Agba. You have just losses everywhere on this team that it's impossible to withstand. He's built a deep roster. And not only that, the Dolphins would have had an additional first-round pick still this year, now that it is this year, if it weren't for the dumbass tampering. And so he's built something that's strong in the present, as long as you don't have 80 injuries, which unfortunately the Dolphins have.
And by the way, that tampering, as you mentioned it, I'll let Eric interject. That tampering was because they didn't trust Tua Tagovailoa to be a franchise quarterback. And JoJo's like, noodle arm, always hurt. Sign Lamar Jackson. Where's Lamar Jackson right now? Is he playing? No, he's on IR.
I don't think Lamar is going anywhere either. I think that we're having this conversation, and I think Baltimore is seeing what this looks like without Lamar Jackson. And I don't think he's going anywhere.
By the way, Baltimore's offense didn't look like world beaters with Lamar. So,
I mean, I would take Lamar, but I don't think Lamar is going to be available. So I think this is another of these conversations like we had with Deshaun. It's just
but this is my point, though. Acting like Lamar Jackson's going to fix everything. Lamar Jackson is a completely different quarterback. You're going to have to reinvent the entire offense to build around what he does. So, we already know that.
And some would say you should, but to me it's a moot point because I don't think it's going to happen. Eric, as I'm reading some of the comments here, it seems like people have soured on Mike McDaniel. Here he goes. Aaron, he gets 1 year to prove himself. I mean, are we headed here again? Because this is the cycle now. This is the cycle. Okay. The honeymoon's over. I think it was a little nicer for Mike McDaniel than it's been for anybody else, and it's evaporated faster, right? Like, at least Tony Sparano got the 1 year, the Wildcat year for 11-5. Before it kind of fell apart. Gase the first year, then it kind of fell apart. Philbin never even got that. Cam Cameron never even got that. Okay, Dave Wannstedt goes back to my era, and it just sort of slid as they went. But I think the idea that he has 1 year to prove himself is kind of ridiculous. But I do think that he has to improve. To me, that's in some areas now, right? Like he's not beyond questioning at this stage.
No, And again, it's not unique to Mike McDaniel. In any aspect, when you start off 8-3 and you end up 8-8, there's going to be questions ultimately about the coach, and that's fair. I think in almost any scenario that would happen, and that's part of the coaching profession. I'm not sitting here saying that he ought to be shipped out. I know that I've been critical of him, but I'm not I'm not ready to say he needs to go, but what I will say is, and this is what I wanted to push back on with as far as like the injuries go, and to an extent it is true the injuries have been absolutely ridiculous this year for the Dolphins. But if they get outclassed, 35-0, and they get absolutely boat raced in this game, I'm more likely to get on the injuries. But the fact of the matter is they could have won this game even with all the injuries. And it felt like they just didn't get up for it, which is really what's kind of got me upset about the effort in this one. Because they weren't positioned to win.
Take out, I mean, it's like one thing leads to another. If Teddy's pick six doesn't happen, which was a terrible decision and a terrible throw, okay? If that one doesn't happen, do they win this game even if Teddy goes out?
I mean, based on the score, yeah, by the way.
Yeah, probably. Because my thing is, even despite the injuries, this wasn't an overmatched Dolphins team. They might have been duct tape and bubble gum. And sure they were, but they were all that, and they were still evenly matched with this Patriots team. All right. Fact of the matter is, I know guys weren't there. And if those guys were there, chances are things would have been different. And that's absolutely true. But in the micro, this is a game that they could have won and should have won this week. And that's just where it is.
The comment about them being more disciplined, I do think is appropriate to bring up now. How many illegal shift penalties are they going to commit? Like, that hasn't been cleaned up. Like that none of that stuff has been cleaned up. That's part of coaching, right, Michael? Like I mean, if you keep committing the same stuff game after game after game after game, it is what it is. I don't think the idea that they're even with the Patriots is not where they should be. It's just not, even with the injuries. It's just not. This is a Patriots team that is essentially in a rebuild. Right? I mean, am I wrong about that? Like, this is not the Bills. Like, they were there with the Bills. That I understand. Losing to the Bills on the road is no great crime. Okay, that team may end up in the Super Bowl. This Patriots team's not sniffing the Super Bowl this year. They're nowhere close to that.
I keep saying this because it's like I feel like we're judging them unfairly. If
they went from 8-3 to 8-8, Lewis.
Okay, but I'm talking about this game. I'm not talking about the entire season. Just forget the pick six. Even if Teddy does throw the pick six, if he had managed to stay in the game, I still believe Miami wins. Seriously, I do, because we wasted an entire quarter trying to get Skyler warmed up for the game. Because once again, we've reached the point where we have not had a single time where the backup quarterback has managed to start and finish the game for one reason. And it's not even that Teddy was, he's injury prone and he got hurt. He smashed his helmet. He smashed his hand against the guy's helmet. Like, that's a freak accident that you can never account for. Like, how many times can something bizarre happen that just knocks out our quarterback? And by the way, that other game that Teddy was knocked out the first time against the Jets, we all know that he was not actually hurt. So I don't want to even use that as, Teddy's injury prone. Okay. That doesn't even count. Skyler once again had to come in cold and spend the first half of the game just trying to feel himself out. That is automatically a recipe for failure. You tell me.
Agree on one thing here. I'm reading this tweet from someone named @416J. Dolphins Twitter is the worst place on this planet. I think I would agree with it. All right, so let's go forward. Okay. Because we're looking at some of these comments. This stumbling, bumbling, frustrated, nonchalant, okay, they're all of these things right now, team can somehow still make the playoffs. Okay, they've completely blown any opportunity to get a higher seed. They're going to get stuck playing, probably Kansas City if they make the playoffs, maybe Buffalo, Cincinnati, best case solution. They're not seeing Jacksonville. Do you want them to? Like, do you want them to? Let's be honest about this, okay? Because they can still get in at 9-8, okay? Michael, do you want this team in the playoffs? Because I saw what it looked like in 2016. I saw what it looked like when Pennington was out. Tannehill was out, and Matt Moore was in, right? How that went. 2008, they made the playoffs, and they got boat raced with Pennington at quarterback, and he couldn't make any kind of throws. I go back to 2000, was it 2001, where Chris Chambers was out in that game and they couldn't manage more than a field goal. I mean, they haven't won a playoff game in 22. Their playoff winless streak is old enough to drink plus a year and 2 days at this point. Do you want them in the playoffs? Because there's a good chance they can make the playoffs. I mean, that Jet team's beatable at home. And the Bills probably going to beat the Patriots, as Lewis has said all day.
Yeah, I think you have to go for the playoffs if you can make it, especially since the other side of it is either New England or the Jets making the playoffs, which you just can't see. But no, I think, are they going to make some noise? Are they in the echelon with the Bills and the Chiefs and the Eagles and so forth? No. I don't think they are at this point, especially with the health that you see. But I think they could potentially go and win a game again if you get Tua, if you get Armstead back and so forth. But at the very least, get that experience for Tua, get that experience for Jalen Phillips and Javon Holland and some of those young guys, especially on the offensive line, of being in a hostile environment on the road and trying to stay disciplined. So I think it'd be good for the team to at least get one game out of that, and also for to keep a full off season of just vitriol from Dolphins Twitter at one another and at the team and at the world from spewing out.
You don't think it's going to be pleasant if they lose 6 straight to finish 8-9 and the Jets take their playoff spot?
And God help us all if the Jets go on a run in the playoffs, thanks to losing to the Dolphins or beating
Mike, what? Mike, so Eric, how do you handle Tua now? Let's say that the doctors come back to you and they say he's cleared. He's cleared. Okay, he can go. He doesn't have a headache. All the rest of his stuff. He's in the film room. He's fine. He can take a hit. You got one game to save the season. You put him out there on Sunday. Deal with the consequences of that.
If the doctors,
and what if Teddy's finger's broken, which may be?
If Teddy can't go and Tua can't go, then you have to go with Skyler. I mean, Skyler looked pretty good in that first quarter.
That's not what I'm asking. That's what I'm asking. If Tua, I would say if Tua can't go, let's say the doctors come to you and say Tua can go, but you guys are responsible for this.
If Tua's okay with it, and his doctors are okay with it, I don't see a reason why not. It would literally just be posturing at that point. I think inherently we all understand football is not great, for the head. But if the doctors clear him and Tua wants to play, I don't see a reason why they should hold him out.
Lewis, let's say Tua plays next week. Let's say they squeak out a win against the Jets because the Jets are the Jets. Let's say that Terran Armstead has had enough time to heal. Bradley Chubb perhaps returns some capacity. Maybe X plays. And they pull out a game against the Jets because the Jets are just as cursed as the Dolphins are, and that's not a great team either. Their offense, anyway. Aren't they losing by 4 touchdowns against Kansas City the first round of the playoffs? I mean, do we want to see that?
I don't know that question. I don't know the answer to that question because the Chiefs were struggling just now against the Denver Broncos, and we know the Broncos are not very good. So, again, this is the thing about the Miami Dolphins that is so frustrating, is that you can never really know for sure what they're going to look like from week to week. It's very inconsistent. If Tua comes back, and I believe the reports are that the only way Tua comes back this year is if they make the playoffs, which is still very much a possibility, because unless you're assuming that Mac Jones is going to go into Buffalo and absolutely wreck the Bills, the only way that happens is if Buffalo decides they don't care about the number 1 seed and they're just going to rest everybody on their bench. So I don't see that happening. So all Miami has to do is beat New York, which is, again, very possible because the Jets, whoever their quarterback is, whether it's Zach Wilson, Mike White, whatever, it is what it is. If I don't think Tua's going to play, but if he did, and if he does go to the playoffs, listen, this offense has shown once again that when Tua's in there, they can score very quickly. And hopefully this game has given Mike McDaniel something to chew on that says maybe I should give some of these Teddy routes to Tua and let him find guys that are not necessarily only in the middle of the field. Maybe I should instruct Tua to not always take the big shot and just sometimes dump it off to these other guys who are standing there and can make 10-yard plays. When I made that tweet that made the whole world explode and my mentions and everything earlier this afternoon, I was not making the suggestion that Teddy was a better quarterback than Tua. I was saying that what Tua needs to do, and I mentioned this earlier in the show too, that's what is the missing part of Tua's game. But I'm not saying take away everything else that Tua does. It needs to be mixed in. And there is no team on this earth that is going to be able to stop the Dolphins on a regular basis if they do it that way. So yes, I absolutely want them to fight for the playoffs. And yes, even if they end up facing Kansas City, you know what? That doesn't mean that they're done for. It just means that they're going to have to score points. And by the way, I'll also mention this. Even during the Flores era, when Tua was supposedly without any weapons and had nothing going for him, even then, there was a time, or at least like 3/4 of the game, Tua was right there with Patrick Mahomes. That was probably one of the best performances he'd ever had up until that point. He just couldn't get the job done because Patrick Mahomes is not human. So with that in mind,
Patrick Mahomes on Keon Crossing. That's a matchup. They should put that one up, like when they advertise this game on CBS. Patrick Mahomes on one side, Keon Crossing, Crossing.
Right. You obviously don't expect Miami to win that game, but can they hang with Kansas City? They can hang with anybody. We've already seen it happen this year. They just need to get Tua in there. They need to see that. Listen, this is why Tua is the quarterback, because when Tua is the quarterback, everything can fire on all cylinders. When Teddy's the quarterback, it's maybe 3/4 of the cylinders. Then when Skyler comes in, you're lucky if you can get the Model T up and running. But
all right, this comment comes in from Ty Moore, and I think this is where we're headed here. Wonder which heads will roll, which the inevitable collapse concludes next week. I don't think there's any question who the scapegoat's going to be for this, and it's going to be Boyer because he's been here longer.
And Danny Crossman.
Yeah, him too. But whether or not people think that's fair, it's going to be the inherited guys. That's the way that this typically works. It's not going to be McDaniel and Tua, but I'll say this, okay? The biggest frustration of this Dolphin season, if it goes the way that it's going, whether they make the playoffs and get routed in the first round or whether they miss the playoffs entirely, which is an epic collapse. I mean, we have to have a conversation. Was 1995 worse? I think it was because they had 22 first-round picks on that roster. Was 2002 worse? I covered that one, so I'm a little bit close to it, but that one was awful. But I will say this, okay? We thought that at the very least this year, they found their coach and they found their quarterback. If this thing ends with them missing the playoffs because Tua couldn't stay on the field and McDaniel couldn't adjust, then we're going to have an entire offseason of people saying they didn't find their coach and they didn't find their quarterback. And that is, and now you don't have the picks you had to fix stuff because of the tampering and because of the Bradley Chubb trade. This is like the worst possible place that they could be. It's just like, it's just, you don't want to be in mediocrity, particularly when you've emptied the chest because you thought you were going for it and you're losing. I mean, the Jets and the Patriots are not supposed to be at the Dolphins level this year. That's the thing. They're not, okay? The Bills, yes. Dolphins beat the Bills and they were competitive the second time. They have played with the Bills this year. They have put up a representative effort. You cannot be dropping games to the Jets and the Patriots this season. That should be 3-1 or 4-0 this year. Those were perceived to be teams that were rebuilding and playing for third and fourth in the division. And then you went and got better during the season where you thought you did with the Chubb trade. That's a very bad place to be. The other thing I'm going to close with, it's not totally his fault because it's a butterfly effect situation. But Jason Sanders cannot be the kicker on this team this year. He just can't. That is one of the biggest misses this year to me is that they never brought in any competition this entire season. You cannot have a kicker in the modern NFL that you can't trust up to 52, 53 yards where at least you feel good about it. You got to coach different, okay? Baltimore, Minnesota, those teams can coach different because they've got a stud there. The Dolphins need to find a stud. They thought they had one. I know, Lewis, you have very specific thoughts about that, but we went from 2 years ago calling this guy one of the best kickers in the league to they lost by 2 today. He had a makeable kick. I'm here in Boston. The wind is less than 12 miles per hour. There's no rain. There's no snow. Your kicker's got to make that kick, okay? I don't know how the game plays out after that, but he also missed a kick against the Jets earlier this year that would have put them in the lead, and then everything fell apart after that. it does matter. It's a total downer to a team. It's like a bullpen that blows a game in baseball. Okay, you can't have that kind of stuff. All right, want to thank Eric, Lewis, Michael. Thanks to all of our commenters here. Somebody said, "Let's go Heat." I will say, for the first time this year, the Heat have a better record than the Dolphins. Hussam called that earlier today. They're not very good either, but I'm not going to say that publicly again. All right, have a good day, everybody. Try anyway. We'll be back this week. Pulse of Fitz Nation Tuesday. Extra Yard Monday. See you guys.
Later. Happy New Year.